Simon Kimbangu occupies a singular place in African history as a spiritual leader whose influence extended far beyond religion into politics, culture, and African self-understanding. Emerging during one of the most violent and dehumanizing periods of colonial rule in Central Africa, Kimbangu's life became a symbol of spiritual resistance and African dignity. His story is not merely about miracles or prophecy, it is about how spirituality became a weapon against colonial domination and psychological enslavement. Simon Kimbangu was born on September 12, 1887, in Kamba, a rural village in the Lower Congo region. At this time, the Congo Free State was under the personal control of King Leopold II of Belgium. This was a period marked by forced labor, mass killings, mutilations, and the systematic destruction of African social structures. Spiritual systems were targeted alongside political ones, as European missionaries often worked hand in hand with colonial authorities to replace indigenous belief systems with European-controlled Christianity. Within this environment, Christianity was presented as the only legitimate path to God, while African spirituality was labeled demonic or primitive. The purpose was not only religious conversion but psychological domination. To control the African soul was to control the African body. Kimbangu grew up orphaned and poor, raised by relatives in Kamba. Like many Congolese children, he was introduced to missionary education and eventually became a catechist under Baptist missionaries. This role placed him in a position of trust and responsibility, teaching Christian doctrine to local communities. Outwardly, he appeared to be a loyal servant of the missionary church. However, Kimbangu's spiritual experiences set him apart. From an early age, he reported visions, dreams, and inner voices that disturbed him deeply. These experiences did not align neatly with missionary theology. They suggested a direct calling from God, one that did not require European mediation. This created intense inner conflict, as Kimbangu understood the danger of claiming spiritual authority as an African under colonial rule. For years, Kimbangu resisted his calling. He feared the consequences, knowing that African prophets were often imprisoned, exiled, or killed. His reluctance was not cowardice but awareness. In colonial Congo, spiritual independence was treated as political rebellion. In early 1921, Kimbangu fell gravely ill. According to oral traditions and early testimonies, he experienced a powerful vision during this illness in which God commanded him to begin healing and preaching publicly. The command was explicit: he was to awaken the people and restore their faith, dignity, and moral order. After years of resistance, Kimbangu finally accepted the call. On April 6, 1921, Simon Kimbangu performed what is regarded as his first public healing. Word spread rapidly across the region. People traveled long distances to Nkamba, reporting healings of blindness, paralysis, and spiritual affliction. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, these events carried immense psychological power for a population crushed under colonial brutality. More important than the miracles themselves was the message accompanying them. Kimbangu taught discipline, moral renewal, and faith in God, but also affirmed African worth. He rejected alcohol abuse, violence, and exploitation, but he also rejected the idea that Africans were spiritually inferior or cursed. He emphasized that God listened directly to Africans and had not abandoned them. The rapid growth of Kimbangu's following alarmed both colonial administrators and European missionaries. Tens of thousands gathered around him within months. To the Belgian authorities, this looked like the early stages of a mass uprising. To missionaries, it represented a dangerous break from European control over Christian interpretation. Kimbangu did not call for armed rebellion, but his teachings undermined the spiritual legitimacy of colonial rule. If Africans could access God directly, then colonial authority lost its divine justification. This made Kimbangu extraordinarily dangerous in the eyes of the state. On September 12, 1921, his birthday, Simon Kimbangu was arrested. He did not resist or attempt to flee. His surrender reinforced his image as a spiritual figure rather than a political agitator. Nevertheless, he was charged with sedition and initially sentenced to death. International pressure and fear of creating a martyr led the Belgian authorities to commute the sentence to life imprisonment. Kimbangu was transferred to Elizabethville, modern-day Lubumbashi, more than 1,500 kilometers from his home. He was held in near-total isolation, forbidden from communicating with his followers. Simon Kimbangu spent 30 years in prison under harsh conditions. Despite isolation, his influence continued to grow. His imprisonment elevated him from healer to martyr prophet. Among his followers, his suffering was interpreted as redemptive, echoing earlier religious figures who endured persecution for divine truth. During these years, colonial authorities attempted to eradicate the movement through repression, imprisonment, and executions. Yet the idea survived, passed quietly through families and communities. The attempt to silence Kimbangu only deepened his spiritual authority. Simon Kimbangu died in prison on October 12, 1951. By then, he had become more powerful in death than he ever was in life. His followers viewed his death not as an end, but as a transition. Stories spread that his spirit continued to guide the movement. After Congo moved toward independence, attitudes shifted. In 1959, the Kimbanguist Church was officially recognized. Today, it has millions of adherents across Central and Southern Africa and in the diaspora. Nkamba is revered as a New Jerusalem, the sacred African spiritual center. The Kimbanguist Church represents a uniquely African form of Christianity, one that rejects European spiritual superiority while retaining Christian ethics. It emphasizes discipline, collective responsibility, and African dignity. In this sense, it is not merely a church, but a decolonial spiritual institution. Simon Kimbangu is credited with prophecies concerning the end of colonial rule, the rise of African-led churches, and the eventual spiritual restoration of Africa. One frequently cited prophecy states that Africans would one day reclaim leadership through wisdom rather than force. His legacy can be seen in liberation theology, African independent churches, and modern movements seeking to reconnect spirituality with African identity. Kimbangu's life demonstrates that spirituality was one of the earliest and most powerful forms of African resistance. Simon Kimbangu was not simply a religious figure, he was a spiritual revolutionary. His life exposed the deep connection between faith, identity, and power. Colonial authorities understood this connection well, which is why they feared him so deeply. Today, remembering Simon Kimbangu is not only an act of historical recovery, but an act of spiritual reclamation.